Puka Nacua has proved to be the top of his class, but there are other wide receivers from the 2023 class that need to be respected headed into next season. We digest the 2023 wide receiver class on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with the NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. We have talked a lot about the rookies, right? But there's other guys, there's other young guys that can still break out or are in the middle of their breakout and that we still need to figure out headed into 2025. So we're going to focus on that 2023 wide receiver class today and kind of just break down all of their outlooks for the 2025 season. Starting right at the top, we got to go with Puka Nacua, right? I mean, he's been definitely the top of this 2023 class. Jaxson Smith-Njigba also broke out this year, but Puka has done it now 2 years in a row. And he's just been fantastic when healthy, right? He missed a big chunk of games this year. But is he just a top 5 option for you now moving forward, at least at the wide receiver position?
Yeah, that's exactly where he finished. He finished 4.5 point PPR last year in terms of average scoring. We know that he's had some injury issues and have slowed him down a little bit. But when he's on the field, he's really special. He missed a few games this year, about a month to 6 weeks. So when you look at his ability, he had right up there with the best in the league. He was tied with Amon-Ra St. Brown in terms of points per game. So pretty good spot there for Puka Nacua. I mean, what else can you say? I mean, he should be going a little bit higher. Everyone was excited about him. I think there was a little bit of disappointment when he couldn't stay on the field earlier in the season, but then there was a clear separation when he returned from Cooper Kupp. Matthew Stafford was feeding him. There was a clear transition to say that he's the clear go-to guy in Los Angeles, no questions asked, and Kupp is kind of a thing of the past here. So, again, all things have lined up well for Nacua. He's locked in. He's in the same offense. Sean McVay is not leaving. You don't have Matthew Stafford leaving. So the variables are not changing. And if that's the case, then he's in a great position to keep producing like he has. And again, he has the ability in any given year, if he scores enough times, to be the top wide receiver on the board, to score more than anybody else. So again, if those touchdowns come, watch out there.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Like, the yards are there, right? He's averaged the 4th most receiving yards per game in the NFL since, being drafted in 2023, behind only Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and Jamar Chase. The yardage is totally there. He needs to score more touchdowns. So he scored 3 this year. Again, he missed a good amount of games, but 7 in his rookie season. I will say, though, even without the touchdowns this year, in the games that he had at least 8 targets, and that was pretty much all the games that he was healthy. And right, there was 2 games where he only played like a quarter and a half, but all the games where he was healthy, he got the 8+ targets. And in those games, he averaged 105 receiving yards per game and nearly 18 fantasy points per game in half PPR. So his ceiling could be massive if he gets a double-digit touchdown season. So I think he's easily a first-round pick and a guy that you'd be confident in. And maybe after Jefferson and Jamar Chase, he might be that next guy that you want to go for there. Now with Jaxson Smith-Njigba, he's going to be a lot more difficult to figure out where to take him this year, right? Because his rookie season, pretty much a bust, I think we could say. It wasn't anything exciting. And then he had a great season this year. But he did finish as a top 20 fantasy wide receiver just 6 times. So those 6 games really did kind of skew the end of his season data. But had a nice season overall with 1,130 yards and 6 touchdowns. What are your thoughts on him as being a top 12 wide receiver moving forward? Or are you kind of putting him more in the 20 range?
Yeah, in half-point PPR, he finished as 22. And there were some spikes, right? I'm looking at the game log here, and he had that big game right before the bye. He just totally went off, dominated, nuts, a bunch of short catches and just racked up a ton of points, scored multiple times. So again, that was the absolute spike. But then there are a lot of games early in the season where he was an afterthought. But really looking at the back half of the season, pretty consistent in double digits in 5 of the final games here after the bye. So he kind of pivoted to being the number one option. Now we have a new offense coordinator in town, so we'll see if that changes. But for now, Geno Smith is still the quarterback, and he has good chemistry with JSN. The biggest thing that needed to happen for JSN was Tyler Lockett kind of fading a little bit out of the picture, where now JSN could be right there as a co-number one with DK Metcalf, and that happened. And the way they were operating this offense, Geno Smith getting the ball out quickly, up tempo here with Ryan Grubb, that there were a lot of shorter passes there. Now they're probably going to be more downfield oriented with Clint Kubiak, but again, there was room for both the field stretchers in this offense in New Orleans, as well as the underneath guys. Like Chris Olave had some potential there before he unfortunately went down with that scary head injury. So I think Jaxson Smith-Njigba is going to be treated kind of like the number one a little bit more, because they can move him around and put him in a lot of situations to succeed. While DK, I think, is going to be treated more as he should be at this point, the number two who stretches the field, uses his body in the red zone. So, and if DK is better, that's only going to help JSN, right? Scheme him open. But there's not a lot here, right? You're not looking at any tight end of note here. That could change in the draft if they go after somebody. But overall, you're saying the Seahawks are pretty much a 2-target team that you're looking at when they're not checking down. So I love it this year for JSN. I like it even more because of the change in offense. I think it's going to benefit him as well as Metcalf.
I think my biggest worries is that people are going to see that he finished as the wide receiver 10 in fantasy in 2024, and he's going to be drafted too early. And I think you pointed out the key here is that he was wide receiver 22 in average points per game. And I think
you have to look at that.
Yeah, that's way more important to look at the end of the year. Just like, especially with consistency, and he was not consistent at all. Mm-hmm. And he played a full 17 games. So that skews the end of season numbers to make him wide receiver 10 when it really wasn't like he was having a ton of huge games. He finished as a top 10 wide receiver just twice in 2 weeks all season long, higher than wide receiver 7 just once that 1 week you brought up before the bye when he went off. So he's a fine wide receiver, and I do expect him to continue to have a good career and be a solid fantasy asset. But if he's going top 12 among the wide receivers in this upcoming draft, I'm probably going to be off of him. But if he falls to an acceptable range, which I think is more in the low teens, then I might be more on him. Are you with me in that?
Yeah, I think Metcalf, you bump him up a little bit, and JSN, you bump him up a little bit, but you can't go nuts. Again, 22 was the finish last year. That was with a pretty good breakout year. So if you're going to see a spike, you're looking around 15. That'll be great. Like if he goes up to 15, you're in business. But again, don't draft him in the top 12 as a wide receiver 1. Then you're going to be disappointed. So it's all about value, all about cost, and we'll get into some more of those guys as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of guys to talk about in the middle of the pack of this 2023 class where it's very hard to tell what they're going to be, right? Are they the true wide receiver 1 for their team? Are they, with Jordan Addison, he's having to compete with Justin Jefferson, obviously, for targets. But then there's Rashee Rice, who was going off before his injury in 2024. Zay Flowers, not a great year for him in his second year. And then Jayden Reed started his second year fantastic, but really fell off after that. So we're going to discuss that middle of the pack of the 2023 class right after we take a quick break.
This episode, Locked On Fantasy Football, as Michelle told you at the top, is sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner who works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in for you. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn has a new feature. It can help you write job descriptions and post your job rather easily. Quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hiring hashtag frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. That's right. That's hashtag hiring. And no wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires consistently. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, Michelle, it is time to break down some other receivers that are a little bit harder to diagnose here. Puka, we know where we're at with him. High end wide receiver 1. JSN, middle of the pack, but solid wide receiver 2. But these other guys, a little trickier. We're challenging ourselves. So let's start with Rashee Rice. He won't be on the field for the Super Bowl for the Chiefs. He was a big impact in their repeat run last year. Now the spotlight has gone on Xavier Worthy, the latest model. So I don't know what to expect from Rashee Rice coming back from injury, some off-field stuff. I don't know how much the Chiefs are going to trust him next year.
Yeah, I mean, if he's healthy and not on this field and not suspended, I think he can be again a great value in drafts. I mean, we saw at the end of his rookie season, he was starting to get so many targets. Now those targets were very low average depth of target. So it was hard to trust him. He was going to need so many targets to make it worth it for fantasy. But then this year it kind of changed. He was getting a lot more yards per reception, but still getting so many targets. I mean, he only played 3 games, but 9 targets for 103 yards, 6 for 75 and a touchdown, 14 targets for 110 yards and a touchdown in his 3 games played. So he was starting off really, really, really hot. And I still think he'd be the most talented wide receiver on this team, even over Xavier Worthy. So if he comes back and he's healthy and, the team still trusts him off the field, right? And he has his role, I do think he can be a really good weapon for fantasy next year and years to come.
Yeah, digging a little bit deeper, and what Michelle said is absolutely right. He was off to a sizzling start. He would have finished as wide receiver 16. Of course, he didn't stay on the field for more than 3 full games, got hurt in the 4th game, but he would have been wide receiver 16, which put him right there, 13 plus points per game, right there with Terry McLaurin, who played the whole season for the Commanders. But that's what he could have done as a wide receiver 2. So I wouldn't say he was going to sustain it, because a lot of things came about here, right? Development of Worthy, and Worthy, of course, benefited from Rice not being on the field. So we have to measure all that next year. So I think the Chiefs, they'll clean up some of this, right? I mean, they're trying their best with Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquise Brown, DeAndre Hopkins. They were just putting guys together because they lost Rice. They were very limited, and Brown was hurt for most of the year. So I think what they want to do is move forward with Rice and Worthy. And as Travis Kelce gets older, maybe checking out of the NFL pretty soon, these 2 guys are going to be the young go-to guys for Patrick Mahomes for a long time. If that's the case, I think Mahomes gets a bump up. These guys get a bump up. I mean, if you're catching passes and scoring from Mahomes and making big plays, you're going to have a lot of value. And I think this definitely, without a doubt, Rice and Worthy, if Rice comes back to where he was, is going to be the best combination you could possibly put with Mahomes.
Yeah, the Rice is going to be a really good value, I think. Now, It is always risky, drafting a guy or counting on a guy coming back from an ACL tear just not even a year removed, right? Yeah. So that's gonna be risky. Maybe it's not till 2026 where we fully see him be back, but I do think he probably has the highest ceiling of a career the rest of the way here among these guys we're going to talk about in this group, because the other ones, Jordan Addison, he could be great, I think, if he was given the opportunity for more targets, but he's going to be stuck with Justin Jefferson for a while here. Pretty much like the same numbers across the board from his rookie season to his second season, but a little bit more fantasy points per game, which was nice. But I will say weeks 11 through 18, he really caught on here at the end of the year. Second half of the season, he was averaging nearly over 15 fantasy points per game in half PPR. But the first half of the season, he was only at 8.6. So really slow start for him. And then he ended up catching on at the second half of the year. But this is going to be his 3rd different quarterback in 3 seasons, right? Same thing for Justin Jefferson, but you trust him a lot more than Jordan Addison.
Yeah, Sam Darnold and Jordan Addison had something going on at the end of last year when they were looking at the red zone. Jalen Naylor and Sam Darnold had something going on. But look, Darnold did as well as he could in the system. You also had Justin Jefferson break out with his first double-digit touchdown season. That gives us hope for Nacua can do that as well with 10. But when you look at Jordan Addison, he was everything they had hoped for as a compliment to Jefferson, getting open, making the plays that were needed to, that were available to him. And he took advantage of that. And he's always going to get the lesser coverage, which is great. As long as Justin Jefferson is in a Minnesota uniform, probably going to be throughout his career. So Addison's in good shape. Hopefully the Vikings will be pressed a decision like the Eagles had with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. And we've seen that on other teams as well. The 49ers did with Debo and Brandon Ayuk, that you could have 2 receivers locked in here for Minnesota being top flight guys. Now, TJ Hawkinson had missed the early part of last year, but the funny thing is when Hawkinson got back is when Addison really kicked into high gear. So maybe we need that third target on the field to draw attention as well to get Addison going. But it'll be interesting. I would expect he has decent chemistry with JJ McCarthy, being two younger players, but that's still a wait and see approach here. So I'd be buyer beware. In reality, he was actually wide receiver 20 in average scoring that point PPR. So actually 21, I should say. That put him ahead of Jaxson Smith-Njigba. So he was actually a better fantasy asset as a clear number 2 than JSN was as a kind of a forced in number 1 last year. So something to keep in mind that he still has pretty high upside.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy that he outscored JSN in average per game. That's not something that you would think off the top of your head with how much JSN was given credit this year for his great season and not so much for Jordan Addison. But Addison has been a great touchdown scorer, and you can't take that away from him. And even putting up 9 touchdowns with Sam Darnold, like he's in a good offensive system. He's going to be a really solid fantasy asset. Like he's not going to have the opportunity to ever be like a top 10 guy as long as he's playing with Justin Jefferson, who's going to steal all of his targets, right? So many of his targets, I should say. But he is going to be a solid fantasy asset as long as he's with the Vikings and in that good system. Now, 2 wide receivers from this draft class who had a huge opportunity in year 2 to really take control and become an alpha wide receiver 1. It was Zay Flowers and Jayden Reed, and neither of them did it. Zay Flowers actually averaged fewer points per game in his second season than his first. I mean, it's almost identical, 10.5. And then in this year it was 10.2. He's not a touchdown scorer, has 9 total touchdowns throughout his career, but Flowers has now scored 10 or fewer fantasy points in 21 of 33 career games. That's 64% of his games. And he only has 2 games with more than 18 points. It's like Zay Flowers, if he was going to do it, you would think it would have been this year. They really needed him to step up and be that wide receiver 1. And kind of same thing with Jayden Reed. Now, he did have some big games to start the year, but I think if it was going to happen for either of these guys, it was going to happen this year. And since it didn't, I can't really see them fully breaking out in the NFL because, like, how are they going to have a better chance than they did this year?
Yeah, this is the range of disappointments that you look at. If you start looking at this, I mean, you go to wide receiver, 33.5 point PPR average scoring. It's Tyreek Hill and DK Metcalf tied. So you look at that, okay, so this is great. And then you're like, oh, Zay Flowers, he went to the Pro Bowl. He must have had a pretty good season. He actually finished as wide receiver 36. So he was the last guy, but if you invested in Darnell Mooney with a much later pick, you got the same player. So, I mean, if you put it in the context of Zay Flowers or Darnell Mooney in fantasy production, you're like, this is not great, right? We were talking about him. Is he on the level of George Pickens and all that before the season? What's a better breakout? Well, a lot of circumstances happened to throw both guys off, but clearly there was just not a lot of inspiration to play Zay Flowers. You're like, I'm not going to get too much. And it ended up that Pickens got pouty and he disappeared in a few games, and Flowers somehow outscored him. But when you're looking at this, neither was all that great. Flowers, again, he's limited. He's a little bit big play dependent. He needs volume because he doesn't score, as you mentioned. So I'm not saying I'm totally down on him. I'm just not excited to go after him now. Could easily bounce back and have a bigger year, sure. But I think this is maybe what it is, right? In this offense, we've seen him in a couple of years do this kind of similar thing. So I'm not going to be excited to draft Zay Flowers. I don't think there's a big bump up left for him. I'll just say that.
No, I don't think so either. And I think the Ravens need to come up with a better game plan for a true wide receiver 1. And maybe that'll help Zay Flowers, right? Not have so much coverage on him because he is that smaller type of wide receiver that maybe he needs that help with coverage. And Jayden Reed, I was high on him this season. But again, the Packers are also a team that have to figure out their wide receiver core and add more weapons for Jordan Love. And I just think if Jayden Reed couldn't take over that wide receiver 1 role and really prove to the team he needed more playing time, he needed more targets, then it's probably not going to happen for him. So Zay Flowers and Jayden Reed, I'm kind of just going to be off of headed into 2025. Well, Rashee Rice and Jordan Addison, I think will be really nice picks. Now, one guy that we still have left to talk about. I mean, there's a group of these guys, but Josh Downs actually scored more fantasy points per game than Zay Flowers. Like, that one is a head scratcher. The fact that Zay Flowers made the Pro Bowl is just so funny to me. But we will get to the rest of this 2023 class. We got some guys, some really interesting ones, and Tank Dell and Quentin Johnson and Josh Downs, like I said. So we'll get to them right after another quick break.
All right, we're almost here. We're in the final week before the big game, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With more than 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw for 1 yard to win that one. So get it into that, take advantage of that, to pair that with one more correct pick, maybe Patrick Mahomes and his rushing yards in that game, and you're cashing out. So there you go, right there with Mahomes for the big game this week. Stay tuned. We'll have our PrizePicks picks later and give you that here to tell you what you should look at for the Super Bowl. And then check out the promos. You can look at the super sweet Millie Winners game, big game lineups there. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in your promo funds right there. Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game.
This episode is also brought to you by Gametime. The Gametime app makes everything easy with buying tickets to your favorite events. It's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. It's the fastest-growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You get a panorama view of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You get to buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. And they have the best ticket coverage in the business in case anything goes wrong. They have event cancellation protection, 24-hour return guarantee, and even job loss assurance. You get to take the worries and the guessing work out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. All right, we have some remainders of this 2023 wide receiver class. And you know what? Some of these guys I actually feel better about moving forward than Zay Flowers and Jayden Reed, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to be going later than them, and I think they have more potential. And you got to start off the bat with Tank Dell, who I think would have been in that second group if he hadn't suffered such a major injury yet again in his second season. So we don't know if he'll be ready at all come 2025. But what do you view his future as, right? Because I don't think he's going to be draftable in 2025. But beyond that, can he come back and be a good asset? Because he was so good as a rookie, down year for most of the year as in his second season, but then started to come on right as, he tore his ACL.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what the Texans decide to do with Stephon Diggs in free agency, because he also had a major injury that ended his season. He's older, right? But the Texans have Nico Collins, and they saw they didn't really have a lot when Dell and Diggs were not available, right? So they didn't really throw to the tight end to make up for it. So they're in a bit of a bind at wide receiver. Some wonder if they should invest more. Do they go after a T. Higgins? I don't know if that's necessary or something they want to do given the state of their offense, but they did fire Bobby Slowick, so maybe looking for a little bit of extra juice in their wide receiver core. So really comes down to, again, if Diggs gets like a more than 1 year deal, then they're kind of more worried than maybe they let on about Dell and his future. So that's something to look at. But 2 years is a long time, right? If you get to 2026, you can turn the page again. Maybe they bring back Diggs on a 1 year deal. That would make us feel a little bit better about Dell. We know Nico Collins is already locked up long term here. So I don't know exactly what you're going to get from Dell. I think he might have a value in 2026. But what the Texans do in the offseason, both free agency and draft in 2025, is going to tell how much they feel about Dell going forward.
Yeah, I really like watching him play. I think he's a great talent. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate with these injuries. I don't think he's injury prone. I think both injuries that he suffered in the NFL were just very, very unlucky. So hopefully he can come back healthy. I do think he can be good in this league again. We might just have to be patient with him until he can get fully healthy and back on the field. Now, this guy, I think, is going to go much later than both Zay Flowers and Jayden Reed next year. And he's thought of as not as good of a player as them for whatever reason. But Josh Downs, who actually scored more points per game than both Flowers and Reed, we actually saw growth from his rookie season to his second year, right? He only averaged 7 points per game as a rookie. That jumped up to 10.5 in his second year. That's still not like great fantasy numbers, but whenever he had a competent quarterback that could throw the ball, right, he has shown like he could be a really good deep threat, especially with Joe Flacco this last year. We'll see if Anthony Richards is going to be the future of the Colts. I think that's always going to keep down ceiling low if it's going to be Richardson, but it seems like the team isn't completely sold on Richardson moving forward. So if he can get a quarterback that can be a good deep thrower, I do think Josh Downs will be a solid value, at least in 2025 in fantasy.
Yeah, I really liked the player. Then we had some rando big plays by Alec Pierce would cut into some games, especially when Flacco was just throwing it up there without Richardson. Just hoping for someone to come down with the big plays. It's very hard. Like this Colts passing game in general, when you look at Michael Pittman, Pierce, and Downs, should be a lot better. And I think what they need, and it's a missing element, I think they'll look at in the draft as a tight end. They need to diversify this passing game. It's kind of boring, and not everyone can stay on the field. I think part of that is Richardson's limitations. He's not the best short to intermediate thrower. Like he's really dependent on the deep ball quite a bit. And that's why Pierce did well for him and Flacco, because just throw it up and hope for the best here. But Downs is a much better talent. Like he can run routes, get him in the open field. They just haven't really done well in scheming this guy open as much as he should be, because again, he's dangerous with the ball in his hands. He was like that in North Carolina. Just get him the ball in short areas and he can do something here. So again, they need to work on that quite a bit. I'm hopeful because Downs has a load of talent here. So again, I'm going to watch him very carefully this offseason and see what they can do and see the reports here to get him a better position to score.
Now, what in the world do we do with Quentin Johnston? Because he was such a big bust his rookie year. He ended up scoring a bunch of touchdowns in his second year, 8 receiving touchdowns, had some long receptions in there. And towards the end of the year, he was starting to get targeted way more. So entering week 11 of 2024, he had just 5 career games with 6+ targets. And then all of a sudden from weeks 11 through 18, he had 6 games during that span with at least 6 targets. He had 8+ targets in 4 of his last 6 games played this last year. He only had 1 career game with 8+ targets entering that span. So he was starting to get used more. It seems like Justin Herbert's starting to trust him. But was it just like a necessity that he had to try to target him, right? He still had a lot of big drops this year. And will the team now add more weapons for Herbert so he doesn't have to force it to Quentin Johnston? I don't think I'm sold on Quentin Johnston being a good fantasy asset just yet.
Yeah, I'm not totally buying it. I mean, Ladd McConkey really is the guy that we're looking forward to going forward. And then the Chargers should also be in the market for a tight end. I mean, no offense to Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst, but they didn't really have a lot of juice. And Dissly couldn't stay on the field per usual. I mean, go back to Seahawks days where he was hurt quite a bit here. So I could see them adding a tight end. Look, it is Greg Roman, so you could see something similar developing, right, where McConkey and his work inside and a tight end are the primary receivers on this team. And then, Quentin Johnston, a bunch of guys fighting for scraps on the outside big play. And what worries me a lot is he finishes the average wide receiver 40 and half point PPR, and he had to get all those touchdowns to make it happen. So, yeah, I still don't think this guy's very good. I think the Chargers got a little bit more out of him. They squeezed more out of him by motivating him and pushing him in the summer, but I think they've probably capped him at this point.
One really interesting guy that's going to go, I'm guessing, pretty late in drafts next year, if he goes at all. It's Cedric Tillman, right? And we saw him get the chance to be a top target with the Browns. Finally, starting in week 7, once they traded away Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman got his chance to be on the field. And he was great with Jameis Winston. But no one's been great with Deshaun Watson. So will he even be the quarterback next year? He re-injured his Achilles. Who knows if he'll be ready? The team has the number 2 overall pick. Do they take a quarterback? There's so many question marks with this team. But they still like Cedric Tillman could still be the wide receiver 1 for them, even though Jerry Jeudy kind of took over that role too at the end of the season. Does Tillman have any fantasy value, do you think?
I got to see what this quarterback situation plays out. They might be stuck with Deshaun Watson, and I don't know what that's going to look like. I mean, there's already rumors Jameis Winston could end up with the Raiders and Pete Carroll and that Chip Kelly offense now. So we'll see if that materializes. But I think the Browns would have a different number 2 as their contingency or bridge should Watson kind of just blow up again and just not be anything valuable, and they'll just have to eat some of his contract. So it's very tough because there's so many moving parts. I don't like it. They moved on from Dorsey, so there's just so many things I'm not sure of right now with the Browns. So the Browns are one of those avoid teams. Look, we just heard Myles Garrett wants a trade. So this Browns team could be blowing up a lot of things. They could use then that number 2 pick. If they got a first rounder for Myles Garrett, they could go get Tedero McMillan, go get another receiver that's number 1. So I think I'm out on Tillman because I think the Browns are due for some change here all across the board of their passing game.
Yeah, some people might be wondering if we're going to hit on Demario Douglas or Marvin Mims or guys like that. No, Demario Douglas is what he is. He's never going to be anything. Marvin Mims doesn't get the opportunity. I mean, he ended the season nicely with 4 receiving touchdowns over the last 2 games, but can't get on the field for more than like 30% of snaps most of the time. Sean Payton just doesn't want him on the field, I guess. I don't know what's happening, but I don't think we can trust anyone else from this draft class headed into 2025 until maybe they'll shock us next year and maybe they'll come on our radar. But for now, I think we hit on everyone of importance. Thank you all to making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We'll be back tomorrow talking about more fantasy football goodness. Bye, y'all.